Welcome to Outside Views EU. Today we'll be discussing one of the most pressing and complex issues the European Union faces: migration and border control. Specifically, we'll explore the EU's approach to managing migration and the role of the Schengen Area and FRONTEX in border control. The EU's migration policies have been a topic of intense debates for years, especially since the migration crisis of 2015. The Schengen Area, which allows for passport-free travel across most EU countries, and FRONTEX, the EU's border agency, are at the center of these discussions. But before we dive into the details, let's start by looking at what the Schengen Area is and why it's so important. The Schengen Area is one of the EU's most significant achievements. It allows people to move freely between 27 European countries, usually without needing to show a passport at internal borders. And this has made travel, trade, and daily life much easier for millions of Europeans. For instance, if you live in Germany and want to travel to France, you don't need to go through border checks. And the Schengen Area promotes the idea of a united Europe where borders between member states are almost invisible. However, this freedom of movement comes with challenges, especially when it comes to migration. Because once someone enters the Schengen area, they can move freely across member states. And this is particularly relevant in the context of asylum seekers and migrants arriving in Europe. Most migrants enter the EU through border countries like Italy, Greece, or Spain. Once they are inside the Schengen area, they can potentially move to other countries without being stopped at internal borders. And this has created tensions between member states, with some arguing that border countries bear too much of the burden. And to address these challenges, the EU has developed several policies and mechanisms. One of the key players in managing the EU's external borders is FRONTEX. FRONTEX is the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, and its primary role is to help member states manage their external borders. FRONTEX was established in 2004, but its role has expanded significantly since the migration crisis in 2015. At its core, FRONTEX works to coordinate border control efforts between EU member states. And this includes monitoring the EU's external borders, providing technical support, and deploying border guards when needed. One of the agency's main tasks is to assist in search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean, where many migrants attempt to cross into Europe from North Africa. FRONTEX also helps in returning people who have been denied asylum or are in the EU illegally back to their countries of origin. But despite its important role, FRONTEX has faced criticism. Some argue that the agency's operations don't do enough to ensure the safety and human rights of migrants, particularly in the Mediterranean, where the journey is often dangerous. Others say that FRONTEX is not adequately equipped to handle the sheer number of migrants arriving at the EU's borders. And these criticisms raise broader questions about the EU's overall approach to migration. On one hand, the EU has a legal and moral obligation to provide asylum to people fleeing war, persecution, and disaster. But on the other hand, there is a need to secure borders and manage migration in a way that's fair and sustainable. Finding a balance between these two goals has proven to be incredibly difficult. One of the key frameworks guiding the EU's migration policy is the Common European Asylum System, or CEAS. The system aims to create a uniform approach to asylum across EU member states, ensuring that the same standards are applied no matter where an asylum seeker enters the EU. However, CEAS has been criticized for putting too much pressure on border countries like Greece and Italy, where most migrants first arrive. Under the Dublin regulation, asylum seekers are generally required to apply for asylum in the first EU country they enter. And this has led to a situation where certain countries are overwhelmed while others face less pressure. Reforming the system has been a priority for the EU, but member states have struggled to reach an agreement. Some countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, have been reluctant to accept quotas for relocating asylum seekers from border states. And this has led to a deep divide within the EU over how to fairly distribute the responsibility for migrants and refugees. And now let's talk about another crucial aspect of the EU's approach to migration, its external partnerships. The EU has increasingly turned to cooperation with non-EU countries to manage migration. And one of the most well-known examples is the EU-Turkey deal, which was struck in 2016. Under this agreement, Turkey agreed to take back migrants who had crossed into Greece illegally in exchange for financial aid and other incentives from the EU. And this deal helped reduce the number of migrants arriving in Greece, but it's also been criticized for outsourcing the EU's migration responsibilities to a non-EU country. And there are also concerns about the conditions migrants face in countries like Turkey and Libya, which the EU has partnered with to manage migration. And these external partnerships have sparked a broader debate about the EU's role in addressing the root causes of migration, such as conflict, poverty, and climate change in regions like the Middle East and Africa. While border control and asylum policies are important, many argue that a long-term solution to migration requires addressing these underlying factors. But this is easier said than done. The EU has invested in development aid and diplomatic efforts in migrant-sending regions, but the results have been mixed. And now let's take a closer look at the future of the Schengen area. In recent years, the Schengen area has faced several challenges. During the 2015 migration crisis, some member states temporarily reintroduced border controls within the Schengen area. And this was meant to manage the influx of migrants and ensure security, but it also raised questions about the future of free movement in Europe. And more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic led to widespread border closures across the Schengen area, further complicating the issue of internal borders. While these measures were temporary, they've reignited debates about whether the Schengen area can function effectively in the face of future crises. Many experts argue that the Schengen area needs to be strengthened and reformed to ensure that it can handle future challenges, whether they are related to migration, security, or public health. And this might involve better coordination between member states, more resources for border control, or new mechanisms for managing crises without reintroducing internal borders. In conclusion, the EU's approach to migration and border control is a complex and evolving issue. The Schengen area represents the ideal of free movement, but it also presents challenges when it comes to managing migration. And FRONTEX plays a crucial role in securing the EU's external borders, but it's not without its critics. And the EU's efforts to reform its asylum system and work with non-EU countries to manage migration continue to spark debate. As the EU looks to the future, finding a balance between protecting its borders and upholding its commitment to human rights will remain a key challenge. And that's all for today's video on Outside Views EU. Thanks for watching, and if you find this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, what do you think about the EU's approach to migration and the EU's approach to border control? Do you think reforms are needed, or is the current system sufficient? I'm quite curious to see what you're writing. And I'll see you in the next video. It's right here in the end screen.